The sharp, insistent pounding on my door jolted me upright, my heart thudding in my chest. It wasn't a polite knock. This was the kind that screamed urgency, the kind that meant something serious was afoot. Before I could fully register what was happening, I glanced out the window and saw red and blue lights flashing outside. My stomach sank. What the heck was going on? I hadn't done anything wrong. At least, nothing I could think of. But then I spotted her, my neighbor, Linda, standing there with her arms folded tight across her chest, her face twisted into that smug, self-righteous smirk she wore like a badge of honor. Suddenly, it all clicked. I took a deep breath, steeling myself as I opened the door. 2 police officers stood on my porch, one clutching a notepad. Linda hovered just behind them. Her lips pursed as if she'd just caught me red-handed in some heinous act. "Sir," the officer with the notepad began, his tone flat but tinged with exhaustion, "we received a report about an abandoned vehicle on this property." I blinked, dumbfounded. An abandoned vehicle? What? Linda seized her moment to jump in. "Yes, officer, that car's been sitting in front of his house for days. It's an eyesore, and it's hogging space. We have standards in this neighborhood." I turned my head slowly, staring at my car, parked neatly in front of my own house, the place I legally owned. A short, incredulous laugh escaped me. "Ma'am," I said, keeping my voice steady, "that's my car, and it's parked in front of my house." Linda's face contorted with exaggerated concern. "Well, you never move it, and it looks abandoned. It's dragging down property values for the rest of us. It needs to go." One of the officers let out a faint sigh, barely hiding his irritation. "Sir, do you have proof the vehicle belongs to you?" Without missing a beat, I pulled out my phone, opened my insurance app, and showed them the registration. The officer gave it a quick look, then turned to Linda. "Ma'am, this car is registered to him. It's not abandoned." Linda's mouth flapped open and shut like a fish out of water. But it doesn't matter. The HOA rules say." Before she could finish, the second officer, clearly over the whole ordeal, cut her off. "Unless there's an actual violation we need to address, this isn't a police matter." Linda gasped dramatically, as if she'd just been personally insulted. "You're just going to let him get away with it?" The first officer turned to me. "Sir, there's nothing illegal here. You're free to go about your day." I nodded, fighting back a smirk as Linda fumed behind them. She stomped her foot like a toddler throwing a tantrum. "Fine. I'll take this up with the HOA." As the cops walked away, I watched her storm off toward her house, muttering under her breath. My amusement quickly morphed into annoyance. I'd been putting up with Linda's antics for months. She fancied herself the neighborhood watchdog, always nitpicking something. I'd brushed off her petty complaints before, but calling the cops over my own parked car? That was a new low. I turned to head back inside, ready to let it go, when something caught my eye across the street. Linda's prized SUV was parked halfway into a clearly marked no parking zone. A slow grin spread across my face. She'd just tried to get my car towed, but what would happen if someone, say, very politely, pointed out her own blatant violation to the HOA? My mind raced. I'd always been a live and let live kind of guy, but this was personal. Linda had started this war, and I was going to finish it. I whipped out my phone again, this time to snap photos, sharp, undeniable proof of her hypocrisy. I zoomed in on the no parking sign, her SUV's position, everything. Then I pulled up the HOA's complaint form and started typing, channeling Linda's own sanctimonious tone about rules and neighborhood standards. The irony was too rich to resist. I wasn't bending the truth or exaggerating. I was just doing what she loved to do, holding people accountable. I hit submit and leaned against my porch railing, a wave of satisfaction washing over me. I didn't just hope the HOA would act, I knew they would. Given Linda's history of pestering them, they'd probably jump at the chance to turn the tables. I glanced at her house. She stood in her driveway, arms crossed, glaring at me like she was plotting her next move. I gave her a small, innocent wave. This was just the beginning. People like Linda never think the rules apply to them, but when karma comes calling, it doesn't knock lightly. It bangs like cops in the dead of night. And Linda? She had no clue what was headed her way. The moment I submitted that complaint, a quiet thrill settled in. This wasn't petty revenge, it was balance, a way to even the score. Linda had gone out of her way to make my life harder over nothing, wasting the police's time and making a fool of herself. Now she'd get a taste of her own medicine. I went inside, grabbed a soda from the fridge, and grinned to myself. I didn't know how fast the HOA would move, but knowing how much Linda hounded them, I figured they'd act quick. She'd built her own trap, and I'd just sprung it. Curiosity got the better of me, so I pulled up the HOA website and dug into the parking rules. I already knew she was breaking them, but what I found made me laugh out loud. The HOA had a 3-strike system. First offense, a fine. Second, a warning and a bigger fine. Third, automatic towing, no exceptions. A grin spread across my face. If Linda had prior warnings, and knowing her, she probably did. She was one step from watching her SUV vanish. The poetic justice was almost too perfect. To solidify my case, I took a walk around the block. Sure enough, I wasn't the only one fed up with her. A retired guy named Tom chuckled when I mentioned the incident. "She's been parking there for months," he said, shaking his head. "HOA's warned her before, but she always has an excuse." Another neighbor, Sarah, crossed her arms. "I've reported her twice. She acts like rules don't apply to her, but if anyone else slips up, she's all over it." This was gold. If the HOA already had her on their radar, my complaint wasn't just a nudge. It was a nail in her coffin. That night, I heard Linda's voice drifting across the street, sharp and irritated as she paced her driveway, phone in hand. I couldn't catch every word, but the glances she shot my way told me I was the topic. The next morning, proof arrived. An orange violation notice was taped to her door and another on her windshield. She stormed out, ripped the paper off her SUV, and read it, her face twisting from confusion to rage. She crumpled it up, muttering, then stomped back inside. Minutes later, she was outside again, phone to her ear, pacing like a caged animal. I could only imagine the HOA rep on the other end, getting an earful. I wanted to enjoy the show, but I wasn't done. If she'd ignored warnings before, I'd make sure she hit strike 3. That afternoon, I sent a follow-up email to the HOA with timestamps of her parking violations and a nod to the neighbors' prior reports. Persistence was key. Linda's own tactic turned against her. By evening, another notice appeared on her windshield, a red final warning. The next morning, the real fireworks began. A tow truck rumbled into the neighborhood, creeping toward Linda's driveway. I stood by my window, coffee in hand, waiting. It didn't take long. The second she saw it, Linda's scream could have shattered glass. She bolted outside, arms flailing. "What do you think you're doing?" she shrieked. The driver, unfazed, handed her a clipboard. "Violation of HOA parking rules, ma'am. This vehicle's being towed." "You can't do this," she snapped. "I was about to move it. This is harassment. I want to speak to the HOA president now." The driver shrugged. "Take it up with them. This order's straight from the HOA." I nearly spit out my coffee, stifling a laugh. Linda was practically shaking with fury as the truck's winch lifted her SUV's front tires. Neighbors peeked out, some smirking, others pretending to mind their own business. She'd made plenty of enemies over the years. When she stormed back from the HOA office, waving her arms and yelling, it was too late. Her SUV was secured. As the truck pulled away, she shouted, "You'll regret this. I'll get my lawyer. This isn't over." But as her car disappeared down the street, I smiled. For me, it was over. For Linda, though, her troubles were just starting. Her scream lingered like a siren as the tow truck rolled off, her precious SUV in tow. She stomped her foot, fists clenched, face a mix of shock and fury. Neighbors paused, some stepping onto their porches to watch. She spun around, phone to her ear, ranting loudly as she paced where her car used to be. I couldn't hear it all, but she was demanding action, her car back, revenge, something. From my window, coffee in hand, I watched with quiet satisfaction. This wasn't just karma. It was a lesson in hypocrisy, delivered cold. Linda had spent months making everyone miserable, nitpicking trash cans, mailboxes, anything she could control. She tried to get my car towed over nothing, and now the system she worshipped had turned on her. She stomped back inside, still yelling into her phone, but an hour later, a police car pulled up. I thought she'd somehow rallied them to her side, but the officers' faces said otherwise. They knew her, and they weren't happy. She charged out, launching into a tirade. "This is illegal. That was my vehicle. I was targeted. I want to file a complaint against the HOA, my neighbors, everyone. The officers exchanged a look. One sighed, rubbing his nose. Ma'am, we checked with the HOA. Your vehicle was towed for repeated parking violations. It was legal. Linda's face turned beet red. I never got a warning. The officer raised an eyebrow, flipping through his clipboard. According to the HOA, you got multiple warnings, including a final one yesterday. This isn't your first report. Her mouth flapped uselessly as neighbors watched, some grinning, others ignoring her. You're supposed to protect people, not let their property get stolen, she snapped. The second officer crossed his arms. Ma'am, it wasn't stolen, it's impounded. You can get it back by paying the fines. Linda made a strangled noise, half gasp, half growl. I'm not paying anything. I'll sue. Before she could finish, the HOA president, Ellen, marched over, looking done. Linda, enough, she said sharply. Linda spun, betrayed. You're supposed to be on my side. I've kept this neighborhood in line for months. Ellen folded her arms. No, we're enforcing the rules you've pushed on everyone else. We're tired of your complaints. You've harassed residents, ignored your own violations, and now, after warnings, your car's towed. It's done. Linda's face twisted, speechless. The street went quiet, everyone waiting. Finally, she huffed, fine. You'll regret this, and stormed inside, slamming her door so hard the windows shook. Peace settled in. The officers left, the crowd dispersed, and I caught whispers of laughter. For once, justice had landed. The next morning was blissfully quiet. No slamming doors, no barked orders. Linda's house stayed dark, curtains drawn. My phone buzzed with an HOA email. Further action regarding resident Linda, last name. It detailed her violation history, not just the parking, but a laundry list of infractions. The kicker? She faced hefty fines, and if unpaid, they'd escalate to legal action against her property. I nearly choked on my coffee. This wasn't just about her car anymore. It was her whole reign unraveling. Soon after, Linda emerged, clutching papers, including that HOA letter. She scanned the street for someone to rant to, but neighbors vanished inside. She paced, phone out, voice rising in frustration. By afternoon, she was at the HOA office, fighting a losing battle. When she returned, she looked rattled, less smug, more panicked. Word spread. She owed thousands in fines, delayed for years by loopholes. Now, the HOA had filed a lien on her house. If she didn't pay, she'd lose it. Days later, she was quieter, making calls, some angry, some desperate. Then, a for sale sign appeared in her yard. The woman who'd ruled the neighborhood was leaving, undone by her own rules. She tried sob stories as she packed, claiming unfair treatment, but no one bit. Moving day was a performance, loud sighs, dramatic head shakes, but no one cared. As her recovered SUV drove off, peace settled in. A young couple moved in, friendly and clueless about the past. The neighborhood exhaled, lighter, freer. Linda was gone, and justice? It felt damn good. Over time, things normalized. The HOA eased up, petty citations faded, and people enjoyed their homes again. A barbecue invite came, welcoming the new folks, building community, not policing it. At the event, Sarah nudged me, grinning. Think she'll come back. I smirked. If she does, she'll find a different place. This isn't hers anymore. We toasted to a Linda-free future, the sunset glowing over a neighborhood finally at peace. No drama, no complaints, just right.